All right, and welcome to the Owl Podcast. My name is Jameson, and as always, I'm here with my good buddy Jerry. Jerry, how's it going?
Doing fantastic.
Good. And we have
Fantastic.
a returning guest from our last episode, Ozzy, who is Jerry's brother. Ozzy, how are you doing?
I'm doing great.
Good. Just a few things right off the bat. We'll just kind of do some self promo here, real quick. If any of you guys who are listening to our podcast ever want to be guests on our podcast, just shoot us an email. It's the owlpodcast@gmail.com, or you can find us on Twitter, which is owl_podcast. And we're also on Instagram, which is the Owl Podcast on Instagram as well. And if you find us on any one of those, we have a link tree there that'll take you to basically any one of our sites. We also have some merch, so buy some merch, support us, be awesome. And yeah, like I said, if you guys want to jump on our podcast with us because you either think we didn't touch on a subject particularly well, or we could have expanded on it, or you disagree with something we said and now you think you have a good argument against what we said, yeah, come on, we'll have anybody on. So yeah, we'll start with that. And then it's been about 3 weeks since our last episode, and a lot's happened. So a lot going on in the world.
Yeah, this is our victory lap, but then not our victory lap. Victory lap on one topic and a very sad
remaining topics. Yeah. So something that we talked about on our last podcast, and I'm just going to touch upon it, and then I'll let Jerry and Ozzy talk on it a little bit more since they did a lot of the original predictions on this. But it's been about 3 weeks since Texas decided not to basically deal with any more of the COVID restrictions. And a lot of people were saying that it was a really, really bad move, that cases were going to go crazy. People were going to be dying left and right. The world was going to end, you name it. And the world's still trucking. So what do you guys have to say?
It's just sad. I mean, it's just so many people like Dr. Eric Fieng, and then just so many like liberal blue check marks. Just the minute that Greg Abbott decided to lift all mask mandates, and I think it was also Mississippi or Alabama, one of those states, but primarily Texas, when they lifted the mask mandate, so many people just so quickly that whole day were saying, Texas, you have blood on your hands. You're responsible for all the deaths. Basically, you're murdering, or you're responsible for the deaths. And it's just, first of all, this COVID thing is not anybody's fault. I mean, unless you want to get obviously in the origin stories of whether or not it was China's fault, but regardless, what happened after, like the whole virus, there's a virus and it's not necessarily anybody's fault here in the United States. Like it's something that we have to deal with, and we have to take necessary, risk assessment, and we have to decide what we're going to do, because we have to weigh all the factors, our economy, our mental health, and also obviously the deaths. But it's so ridiculous for people to say that if you list all restrictions that people are going to just die, or all the deaths are going to be in your hand or on you. And then, 3 weeks later, why I made the joke that it's a victory lap, because none of those predictions have proved true. Like finally, we finally got one right. We finally got a prediction right. Like none of those predictions that people were saying, that the hyperbolic people were saying that everybody's going to die, like none of those came true. And cases have continued to go down. Hospitalizations have gone down, deaths have gone down, everything's gone down. We don't know exactly why that is. It could be a seasonal thing, but the mask thing didn't have an effect. So that's why it's kind of a victory lap here for us.
Speaking of masks, sorry if any of you guys were already speaking, I'm interrupting, but Jerry, you were in Colorado just a little over a week ago. Do you remember when we went to Social, the bar?
Yeah.
Did you notice most of the waiters and waitresses in that restaurant were wearing 2 masks?
Yeah, I did notice that.
That was the most ridiculous thing ever. Like, you can't already hear somebody with 1 mask, and then all of them are now wearing 2, and in a pretty loud environment. It literally sounded like Charlie's Brown teacher every time she was talking, just and you're like, okay, I still want this drink though, but I don't know. I just think that you're right. the statistics are showing that, infection rates are going down, death rates are going down, and some people might contribute that to the vaccine, and who knows, there could be some truth behind that, but it's clear that the masks are a bunch of hooey. And now just telling people to double down, wear 2 masks, it's like, okay, it's like, I'm just, it's exhausting, and I'm just over it. So
Yeah, I mean, I honestly don't even know where to start, because in the last podcast, I feel like we kind of hit most topics, and or especially this issue, but it's just anybody, I feel like, at this point, who's really still like with the serious face advocating for massive lockdowns, or the efficiency of lockdowns, or the efficiency of masks. I mean, we should try to invite some of them on, because I know there's a lot out there, but it's just like I said in the other podcast, the data is so overwhelming. And I'm not even the biggest anti-mask person. Like, I will wear a mask when I'm indoors in a private area that ask me to. But it's just clear that these mandates that, state governors or states or countries in general that they try to impose, that they have absolutely no bearing at all on the infection rates and the fatality rates. And it's just clear that there's so many people walking around with a cloth mask thinking that that does anything, and when it's just, the evidence is overwhelming that it doesn't. And I do think we need to like be clear, though. I do think that there is evidence to show that, as far as for N95 masks, just ones that you see in surgery, or you see doctors wearing, those are to proven to reduce transmission more. But yeah, overall, I guess we were talking about a victory lap, but it's just funny. Like, I have right here a list of all of the people who were talking about 3 weeks ago that Texas lifting these mandates, and it was going to cause so much death and destruction. And I could start with Gavin Newsom, who's tweeted out on March 2nd that this was absolutely reckless. Even the Spurs coach, Greg Popovich, was calling Greg Abbott, the Texas governor, ridiculous and ignorant. One of the Texas ICU nurses said, "I'm scared of what is going to look like inside." And again, nothing happened. Even Dr. Fauci, it's just inexplicable why you would want to pull back now. And Beto O'Rourke takes the cake with the hyperbole. He's basically called the Republican Party a death cult. And I just think one thing that's important in all of this, and I think kind of shows like what we've been talking about, or what I've been talking about specifically, is a study that I saw like this last week, that basically said over 80% of the COVID deaths and COVID infections, or 80% of the COVID infections, could be traced back to inside hospitals. And I think that kind of just highlights the pointlessness of the lockdowns, and also the pointlessness of the mask mandates, because so much of the infections have been happening inside of hospitals. And so these pointless lockdowns, where you're attempting to lock healthy people inside for months on end, and you're imposing these mask quote unquote mandates where you're forcing them to wear cloths, and it just, there's no reason for it. There's no reason for it. And it gets back also to like, we could have handled this pandemic so much better than what we did. And I just think it's a big lesson for when this happens again, that we need a way more better focused approach to taking, or to handling these things, because the way we did it, the way we went about it, was just so, it just seemed like we tried to throw the book at it, and it just failed miserably. And I don't know. What do
Look,
you guys think?
I'm not, like you said, I'm not anti-mask. I think masks, if they're shown to do anything, is reduce the viral load that you receive in an environment so that you don't get as sick. What I'm against is the symbolism behind the mask, which they've turned into a virtue signal. They've turned into a way to say, I'm better than you. I'm wearing my mask. Look, I'm still following the rules, and I'm doing what's right. And that's really what irks me, and that's really what gets on my nerves, because it's not a virtue signal. There's no evidence to really show that a mask mandate has any effect. And politicians have used it as a crutch to, they just say use your masks and that's it. And they don't do any actual meaningful, not legislation, but take any meaningful action or executive orders that could help the most vulnerable, right? So I forget the study, but it showed that line cooks, for example, were some of the most heavily hit professions. Like, why not protect that industry? Why not protect those workers? And instead, all you got from Newsom was wear your mask. This is stupid. You got from Biden, this is Neanderthal thinking. And there wasn't actually dedicated evidence-based policy, like something like Ron DeSantis was doing, which was fuck the CDC guidelines about vaccinating Black and Latino people first. Like, I'm going to vaccinate elder people first, because those are the people that are dying from this. And that's exactly why I'm against the sort of virtue signaling of masks and everything that comes behind it, because it is a virtue signal. And there was a great video by Ted Cruz, I think it was a couple days ago, where a reporter, he's doing his interview, he's doing his press conference, and the reporter comes up to him and says, "Can you wear your mask, please?" And he says, "No, I'm vaccinated. Why would I wear my mask? I'm vaccinated. Like, I can't spread it anymore, and I'm going by the CDC guidelines." And he goes, "Well, I'd feel more comfortable." And Ted Cruz is like, "Well, then go somewhere else if you don't feel comfortable." Like,
he even told her, like, yeah, we're following the science. The science. I'm immune now. And like the most hypocritical part of all of it is Jen Psaki, the White House press secretary, has been doing press releases every day, taking interviews or taking questions from reporters every day since Biden was inaugurated without a mask. When did we ever hear a question towards Jen Psaki to put on a mask during a press briefing? It just shows how biased our media and our reporting class is.
Well, and I think Jerry, you brought up something in that story as well that kind of hits the nail on the head. As far as some people, I think they view the mask as almost a safety blanket, and going up to Ted Cruz there and like, hey, I'd feel more comfortable if you wear the mask. That's personally why I wear it. Like, it's no inconvenience to me whatsoever, but it does give those other people, like, also there are a lot of people out there that view it as a safety blanket. Like, I'm protected now that I put on this mask. I can maybe go out and live some semblance of real life. Like, all right, if that's what gets you out the door to your day, that's fine. But it's keeping people in some form or another living in terror, which is, well, it's pretty fucked up. So, but yeah,
I just wish our health officials would be like more specific about what these masks are like what they can do,
just more
or
transparent.
More transparent. Like, hey, there's a difference between an N95 and a cloth mask. There's a difference in all these things, and you wearing around a cloth mask isn't doing anything. It's literally just going right through. Like, the particles of coronavirus are so tiny. I think I saw a study, or whatever you want to call it, that came out like a month ago that said you could fit all of the world's coronavirus particles inside of a Coke bottle. That's how tiny of a particle coronavirus is. And cloth masks don't do jack shit. And no, you don't hear that from Fauci. When Fauci was the one saying cloth masks don't do anything in the first place in March.
He's like, wait, that goes against the agenda. Cloth mask, clear up.
Yeah, just a complete 180. And again, when did he ever does anybody ever call Fauci on that? Like, I think that's just another indictment on our reporting class, on our journalistic class. Fauci does so many interviews. Like, I see him almost every day in every form of podcast and TV and radio. When has anybody ever asked him, "Hey, what was with the complete 180 on the mask things? Like, what happened there?" And I don't know.
But yeah, but they did, and Rand Paul asked him, and Rand Paul, I thought, did great when he did his interview with Fauci. Not his interview, but like a Senate hearing, I think it was. Fauci basically said, "You're vaccinated. Why are you still wearing your mask? Like, that's not the CDC guideline anymore. And Fauci said, well, we don't know. And then he brought up the variants. We don't know. We're not 100% sure. And he said, Rand Paul called him out and said, well, this is just theater. And he said, no, it's not theater. We don't know. And it's like some people have called him out, but Fauci just gets super defensive. And instead of acknowledging that he was wrong sometimes, or that, yeah, the masks, it's okay to take the masks off once you have the vaccine. Like instead, he just doubled down and said, no, you need to wear 2 masks now. Like JMO was saying at the beginning, like if you don't wear 2 masks, like now you're killing people. Like the whole 2 mask thing is that's probably what we should have been doing since the beginning, but that wasn't the messaging. But now that it's over, like it's a little too late for that.
Yeah.
Well, is what it is at this point. It just seems like I don't feel like masks are going to be going away anytime soon, especially in specific states: California, Colorado, New York,
like I said,
Massachusetts.
Masks aren't even I think clearly the lockdowns are the biggest, at least for me, the biggest problem, because that has real life consequences on so many people. The school closures, those are real harms that are being affected every day that people are actually feeling. And as far as the mask, to me, the masks just show how silly so much of our arguments have become. Well,
I would push back against the mask though. Like I would push back because, like you guys were saying, like people feel like it's a safety blanket. Now, people feel genuine fear when people around them don't have the mask. Like, I don't know. I don't think you can discount, especially with children. Like, they're growing up in a generation where they think that masks are safe, and if you don't have the mask, it's going to be unsafe. So imagine like the anxiety when you actually take your mask off, and your parents for the whole year have been telling you that if you don't wear your mask, you're going to be unsafe. Like,
that's fucked up.
People like I've been walking around like in San Diego. I went to Balboa Park a couple of weeks ago, and I was just walking around without my mask on, and then this kid was just running around being a kid, and this mom, like, I don't know, maybe 20 feet away from me, like she was not yelling, but lecturing her kid and being like, don't go around people without their masks, like saying stuff like that. Like, that's the world that people are growing up in. That's the world that kids are growing up around with. And I mean, it's unprecedented. We don't know the effects that it's going to have, but it can't be good. Like, it can't be good to grow up in a world where something around your face, or like you're always walking around with a safety blanket. Like, like we that can't be good.
My mom, she told me kind of a sad story, since we're speaking of kids and how they, they're viewing masks and stuff like that. And she does a substitute teaching at this one school, and she was teaching, I want to say it was like 2nd graders maybe. Anyway, this one girl drew this picture and she gave it to my mom, and she goes up to her and she's like, here, this is a picture of me. And she goes, I wanted you to know what I look like without my mask on. And it's like, okay, if that's not like heart wrenching, I mean, like these kids, I think they even get it. Like it to them, I don't know. Like you said, they might view it as like it's a safety net, or they might just, or no, it's a sign of safety, or they might just view it as like another thing that they just have to do because mom and dad told them, like, this is what we have to do. And this is, it's a form of, I don't know, maybe keeping them isolated from other kids or from even being kids. It just kind of sucks.
It's crazy how much of masks just feels like your whole identity is stolen. Like I walk around with my mask and I just feel like nobody can see me. Like, I don't know. It just feels like so much of like yourself and your identity is just like, it just has to be stuck to be like a Muslim woman in one of these countries that forces you to wear the niqab or the hijab or whatever it might be. Like, or full burqa. Like, I don't know about you guys, but I feel like when I'm wearing my mask outside, like I can't see people, like people can't see me, like, especially if I'm wearing a hat and a mask, like it's just like, I don't feel like myself. Like I feel like my identity is just kind of, it's not there. And I just feel like, I don't know, it's weird. And now imagine for kids, like they must be like, oh, well, they only see me with my mask. Yeah.
Yeah. For kids, when I'm like driving by, I remember last week I was driving down the street and these kids it was like a private school, and they were playing outside in the yard or whatever, in the playground, and they were all wearing masks. And it was a bunch of kids, like 5, 6 year old kids, and they're all wearing masks. I'm just like thinking in my head, like, what is even the point of this? It's just the I think this last year, like the harm that we've imposed on our children, the most vulnerable people in the planet, where these we're gonna feel these reverberations for years to come, because not only have we screwed over the poorest among us who can't go to school, but we've also affected the children who depend so much on social interaction, who depend so much on making new friends, on messing up, on falling, on getting back up. This is like a
On just
normal
being
part
kids.
of, yeah, being kids.
Yeah.
That's part of being a kid. Like I remember when I was a kid, I used to be the biggest daredevil. I would like ram my bike into the wall. Like I would just, but that's how I learned, and we're creating, if already we're seeing so much from Generation Z of how sensitive they are to criticism and how sensitive they are to almost anything. And I just can't imagine how much worse it's going to get,
Mm.
and yeah, it's just, we live in a world now where just paranoia is normal. Paranoia is the normal for so many people, and it's sad. It's
But
really just,
we in hindsight, we should have seen it coming, and we should see it coming for the future. Like this is the same generation that in college campuses was saying that words are violence, and then when Donald Trump was elected, was saying that this is the second coming of fascism. And they're just so extreme. It's a generation that is so extreme in its thinking and will pick a single topic and almost make it like an existential crisis. And
Yeah.
that's how they treat everything. And we should be
Oh, they're
careful
willing
for the next thing.
to die on that cross the minute that they get it too.
Yeah, exactly.
Like there's no stopping them.
Yeah, Trump was not Hitler. Words are not violence. You need to be able to listen to dissenting opinion. And the same thing with coronavirus. Coronavirus was not the Black Plague. And these kids continue to cry wolf. This generation keeps enabling them, these people. And it's scary to think like there is no bottom. Like I was listening to the Fifth Column with Camille Foster, and he was just saying that there is no bottom. There's no extreme. There's no end. Like it's not even fair to call them, I don't know what to call them, but they're the hyperbolic generation. They're a generation that just will take everything to an extreme and make it an existential crisis. And if you don't fall in line, like you are killing or immoral or something. Like it's just there's no end game. Like we need to be careful with the next big events that come up.
I mean, a perfect example is if you look over the summer, obviously, with like the Black Lives Matter movement. They didn't care there's a pandemic going on. They were still willing to go out and do massive protests, riots, looting, the whole works. And it's just kind of like what you said. They take everything to the extreme. They believe all of a sudden that George Floyd's murder is the worst thing that could have possibly happened. And now it's rioting the streets. Sad? Yes. But did it warrant, massive riots in Minneapolis? Absolutely not. I mean, you're right. They take everything to such a crazy extreme, and they're even willing to do violence, it seems like, in some most extreme cases against those that have dissenting opinions against them. This mask is now their next hill that they're willing to die on. And obviously they're looking at Texas as the enemy, but it's like we've been saying, like, dude, look, it's not that big of a deal. The world is still turning. Like, just chill out. I mean, come on.
Yeah, it's so hard for so many people now. We're all just so paranoid. We're all so tense. And especially this last year, it's ramped everything up. I mean, already with Trump in 2016, things were getting kind of crazy. Things were getting, really intense. And then just this last year, I think it put a lot of people over the edge. And it's just, so many people just don't know how to just take a deep breath and like just relax for just a second and just soak it all in. And just life is not that serious. None of us are going to get out of it alive. And the realization that, eventually we're all going to die. We're all, finite beings should make everybody just chill the fuck out. Like, we're
Enjoy
all
life.
in this together. Exactly. Enjoy the ride. Like, why are we yelling? Why are we so angry? Why are we so just, when you start digging down as to why so many people are so angry, you're like, wait, what? That's why you're yelling at them? Like, what? It's I don't know. It's really disappointing seeing how the potential of humanity, seeing both sides of the spectrum, seeing the good that we can do, and the amazing accomplishments we can do, and can reach this. We can literally have space hotels. We can travel to different planets in our solar system alone. Who knows about the stars? But in this century alone, we can do so much if we just came together. And it's just sad seeing that, that other spectrum just completely mess everything up.
Mhm. Yeah. I mean, there was a person that I remember recently I had a conversation with that I literally just had a difference of an opinion of something that they believe to their very, very core. And I would give my counter arguments, and it would get them so frustrated to the point where they were crying. They were like in tears that I could not see their point of view. And I'm like, it's not worth getting that upset over someone having a different of an opinion of you.
Yeah.
And it's
I don't
just
know how such a simple concept like that is so hard for so many people. Like, it's just, how are you not just simply allowed to disagree with somebody? Like, I think a good Thomas Jefferson quote, one of my favorite Thomas Jefferson quotes is, he said, I never considered a difference of opinion in politics and religion and philosophy as cause for withdrawing a friend. And it's really that simple. Like,
yeah.
I can think you're complete. Like, I have friends, and I have, like, most people aren't politically aware like we are. Most people, they have their beliefs, they have their ideas, but they don't know much. Most people are 9/11, conspiracy theories. Most people haven't really thought a lot of things through, and that never meant, just because some of my friends believe, completely, conspiracy theories, crazy things like 9/11 was an inside job, that I never held, that never was the cause of me disliking them more. I could think they're wrong, and I can try to have a, civilized debate with them, but it was never cause for me to think less of them, or think I'm gonna stop talking to you, because you hold some belief that isn't really substantiated.
Yeah.
And yeah, I don't know. It's sad how so divided we are, when there's so much more that unites us versus divides us. I don't know.
Well, one of my oldest friends, I mean, he and I have been friends since we were like 15, 16 years old, somewhere in that ballpark. He and I have very different political opinions, yet he and I get along amazing. And yet, anytime that we have a political difference, we can sit down over a beer or a glass of whiskey or whatever, and we can talk and have like a really, really good in-depth conversation where I feel like I understand his point of view more. He feels like he understands my point of view more. And it's like, it's a good way to interact with somebody that you have a difference of an opinion, because it's emotions don't get flared. We can still have a few jokes, a few laughs in between. And you actually feel like that was productive. I learned something, or he learned something. And it just, like, you can't, those conversations are just so incredibly rare these days. Like, he's probably one of the only people I know I can have those kind of conversations with, and we can still have an amazing friendship, versus other people where if I have those kind of conversations, they probably won't want to talk to me for a month. It's ridiculous.
Yeah. And I don't know. I think it goes beyond broken friendships and like that. That part's sad, but what's even sadder is what I see is like a power grab from these people, where it's not only like lost friendships or lost family members or whatever it might be, like they're trying to ruin you. You can't even have a job, like you can't even make a living, like you are canceled
the cancel
from
culture.
society. Yeah, and it's part of that. It's just sad that you can't have a dissenting opinion. You can't even disagree. Like everything you say now and everything you've said in the past and everything you'll say in the future is always going to be monitored or looked at or scrutinized by the times that those people are in, and you could lose everything, even an off color joke or a joke. Like, it's just sad. Like,
Yeah, I think an important thing that kind of encapsulates what we're talking about, but I think it kind of separates it a little bit is this idea that, you know, certain people try to parade around like, oh, well, if I disagree with somebody, I'm gonna, you know, I'm not gonna like them because, oh, I think they're racist, or I think they're yada yada. And you know, we know humans are much more complex than that. But I think for me personally, I just saw a tweet the other day, and I think it kind of highlights at least my perspective. And it says, I'm increasingly less interested in people's ideology and more interested in their integrity. Only one consistently predicts a person's ethics. And I think that kind of highlights, at least for me, you know, I will have a problem with you on a personal level if you start to lie, or if you start being manipulative, or if you start, you know, if you're dishonest. Then I think, you know, we're gonna have a problem. You know, I can't hang out with you, or I can't be your friend if you're making stuff up, or if you're lying, or if I see that you're deceiving people. That's a problem. And I think bigger than ideology, because I know some of my friends are like commies, like full on communists, and I talk to them, and you know, that's their ideology. I can think they're completely wrong, and I can try to have a debate about that with them, but I'm not going to think like they're the worst. But I can think that, oh well, maybe they derive those ideas because they still think it might work, yada yada. You know, we can have that debate. But I think much more important than that is your ethics, is your mode of being, your integrity, like who you are as a person. And that's something that I think that, you know, full well we need to call out. Full well we need to call people out when they're dishonest, when they're, you know, deceiving people. And that's I don't know, that's a distinction that I think is important to make, at
and
least
that,
for
I think
me.
that's such a great point. And honestly, I think we can segue into the next topic because of that. Like, I think so many people have a problem with this movement, this cancel culture, this whatever it might be. I don't know what to call it, but whatever this movement is about, cancel culture, like wokeness, it's a lack of integrity in the part of this movement. They seem to just throw away everything they believe just to make a narrative fit. And when a story doesn't fit, when a situation doesn't fit, like, it doesn't matter. They are not willing to go into the details. They want so badly for a story to fit their narrative that they're willing to throw away everything that they believe. And a good example of this, a great example of this, is the shooting that happened in Boulder recently. I mean, it was a tragedy. 10 people died in Boulder, Colorado, when a mass shooter went in a store and just started killing people for apparently no reason. We don't know yet. We're just recording this a couple days after it happened. But immediately after the shooting happened, like literally as it was happening in real time, people were pictures started showing up of the shooter, and everybody was like, "Look, he's white. The cops are taking him out alive. If he was black, he'd be dead. If he was black, he'd be shot." And they were just everything was just meant to fit that narrative that if he was black, the cops would have shot him. And then when it turns out that his name was, I don't know, some Arab name,
Ahmad.
Ahmad, um, everybody was like, "Look, he's not white. He's a Syrian refugee." And I'm not kidding you. There was, I think I forgot his name, but he's like this black commentator. He has like on his Twitter profile, Race Baiter. He said,
Mhm.
Arab people, because he didn't get shot by the cops, he's actually white, and look at his whiteness. And it's this matter of integrity. Like, do you guys have no morals? Do you have no standards for what you're preaching? Like, you can't have everything fit your narrative. You're just a bunch of liars and charlatans, and it's obvious for everybody to see. And there's no consistency here, and that's, I think, is the biggest problem.
Well, and to even add more fuel to the fire of what you're talking about, Jerry, is a couple of people that I follow. They're they're still like, I still really like them, but they're extremely liberal. And they were jumping all over that narrative immediately, as far as like, oh, it's a white guy, look how he's coming out alive. And they were posting like, before they even knew the identity of the shooter, they already had like this collage put together of, a white guy who, basically did some kind of tragedy, as far as like a mass shooting or something like that. And they put like underneath, alive, and then they put, a picture of George Floyd next to him, and they're like unarmed, dead. And then they just had like a dozen different names. And, it was a white guy who was alive and a black guy who had died. Just once again, pushing that narrative. And then this one guy that's on Twitter, I don't remember his name, Aaron something. He basically posted about how, I think it was like even during the shooting, he's like, there's a white guy that goes into the King Soopers in Boulder, kills, 10 people, just, and he's taken into custody alive. Just down the street, Elijah something, I can't remember the guy's name, was basically begging to live, and the cops still killed him. And it's like, you guys are pushing a narrative so hard. And what's crazy is that tweet had like over 400,000 retweets. So, I mean, this narrative was pushed hard. And I even saw some people put it on like their Instagram stories. And the minute they found out that it wasn't a white guy, they took that off their Instagram stories so quick. I'm like, you virtue signaling bastards. You guys are just so quick to push a narrative, so quick to just shame white people, because it's exhausting.
Yeah, I just think it's indicative of the journalistic class and why so many people believe the things that they believe. Like it's all just pushing a narrative. They're literally all just trying to push a certain narrative that America is a white supremacist country, and that we live in, a hellhole and yada yada, and America's all corrupted. And it's always trying to push that narrative. And it's just the reality. Not only does that not bear it out, but they don't even like any sort of event that goes with that narrative, they will amplify to the max, and they will ignore all the other things that happen around America daily. And it's just so the difference between what's actually happening and what the media is trying to portray as reality is just, the schism has grown so much, especially recently. Like it's just been taken over by so many people that purport to be journalists, when in reality they're activists. Like the media narrative and the actual facts are two separate streams of data that now only periodically overlap. And it's just it's crazy, it's sad. And again, like, just to emphasize on what we were talking about, like there's so many examples of it. But there was a really good thread of all the people on Twitter who, right when that mass shooting happened, you could just go down the list, and we're not just talking about like any random person on Twitter. We're talking about mainstream journalists, like mainstream people who parade around, who supposedly are the arbiters of truth, and who walk around like, they're not activists, right? And yeah, there's just so many examples. But yeah, or sorry, I need to pull up the list.
Yeah. No, and look, a great example of this is obviously the Boulder shooting, what happened, but it just popped into my mind. Like a great example of this was what happened in Miami. In Miami, there was people going ape shit, like crazy, partying, like spring break, like it was no tomorrow, obviously enjoying the fact that lockdowns weren't a thing there. And the media pushed this narrative that it was because of COVID or spring breakers. Like that's so if people don't know, Miami got a curfew imposed, and ostensibly it was because they were afraid of the mask policies or the COVID outbreaks, which isn't the case. Florida's had hosted the Super Bowl a month ago, and that wasn't the case. So it was just this narrative, this crux that they were using, when reality, and the media wasn't reporting on this, was there was violence, there was shootings, there was fights, there was a girl got drugged and raped and killed and just left for dead. It was actual violence and actual horrific things happening, and nobody was reporting on it.
It had nothing to do with COVID.
Yeah, spring breakers.
Yeah,
forego masks regular. That wasn't the story. That
Yeah.
wasn't why they shut down.
Yeah. So here's just a couple of what we were talking about. So the Deadspin editor which is a pretty prominent website, wrote, extremely tired of people's lives depending on whether a white man with an AR-15 is having a good day or not. And then the USA Today editor replied to that. She's a USA Today editor. She replied, "It's always an angry white man, always." And then the other lady replies, "And they're always angry about women." And it's just, they were, that, to me, that's just blatant racism. Like it's become like we become so focused on being anti-racist, which is obviously a good thing, but we become so focused on being anti-racist to all the other races that we've made it okay to be racist against white people. Like literally it's just okay to just call people out for being white now. And it's just, since when did that become like a good thing to do, to judge somebody on their race? Like it's crazy to me. I don't know.
Yeah, but
It's literally
what's weird in
mainstream.
their mind is that they literally believe to their core that only white people can be racist.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
anything that they do that's against white people, it's not racist,
Yeah.
even though it literally is the definition of racism. No, they rewrote the rules to abide to their agenda.
Yeah. Or this is her name's Mina Harris, Mina Harris, which is Kamala Harris's niece or something. She was like, the Atlanta shooting was not even a week ago. Violent white men are the greatest terrorist threat to our country. And it's just, they don't even care to wait for the facts. They just want them just make complete ass out of themselves. And it's just sad. It's just
But they
sad
don't
how
care. Look, here's the tweet from that grifter Tariq Nasheed. He wrote, "The fact that this dude gunned down for the Boulder shooter, the fact that this dude gunned down 10 people and the police didn't shoot his ass, that means he's white. We ain't gonna start playing games just because he was born in Syria. The suspect is white
no matter
enough
what
to
you can't
benefit
win.
from the privileges of white." So 4 years ago, when people were asking for Syrian refugees to come into the country, they were just asking for a bunch of white people to come into the country. Is that what this guy's saying? Like,
Yeah,
it's
that's
so
like
ridiculous.
Twitter's is such a shithole. Honestly, like this is another one. This had 170,000 likes. Like, if you're on Twitter, you know how crazy that is. Like 170,000 likes is freaking insane. And the tweet, it said, a white man walked into a grocery store in Boulder, killed 10 people, and was apprehended by police and walked out of the building completely unharmed. Right down the street, police killed Elijah McClain while he apologized for not doing
That's the
anything
guy I
wrong.
was talking about.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
it's just, you were wrong. You were dead fucking wrong. And it's just these people who, I'm someone who hates arguments from anecdotes. Like, you cannot make a broader argument about America in general based on one anecdotal example. But even in your anecdotal example, you were freaking wrong. And it's just these people, I don't know if they've never taken a statistics course, or it's also human nature, because studies show that you can try to present as much data as you can to people. You can show them graphs, you can show them statistical models, and that won't make a difference. But you give them one anecdotal, emotional, story of one person, then that can change their mind instantly. And I think that just shows the predicament that we are in, because something like George Floyd, which was, something super rare, and, something sad, obviously, that happened, but then because of one anecdotal example, people made these crazy assumptions about America. And yeah, it's just the power of the human brain and the susceptibility that it has to believing things that are just not true. And also, I don't know if you guys want to talk about the George Floyd case, because I'm someone who, I don't care how controversial something's going to be. Like, when I start my podcast, which I'm starting soon, I'm just gonna call things how I
Shameless
see it.
plug.
You know, I'm just gonna. Yeah, I mean, I don't. I'm
It's
at
gonna
the
be
point
so
where.
great, much better than this podcast.
No,
Gonna
but you
dwarf you
know,
guys.
but like, okay, but George Floyd is definitely like, if you even remotely try to imply that what happened to him might have been somewhat maybe justified, then you're gonna get painted as some freaking Nazi, racist, white supremacist. Because to so many people, it seems so obvious, right? We saw the video. He had his knee over his neck, and that's that. And Derek Chauvin killed him. But when you start looking at the facts, when you start looking at, wait, what actually, led to this, and you start to realize that, wait, he had enough fentanyl in him to kill a horse. And the autopsy showed that if he would have just been found at his house or randomly, on the street or something, they would have just ruled it a fentanyl overdose. And that needs to be taken into consideration. And the maneuver that Derek Chauvin put when he put his knee over his neck, that was protocol for Philadelphia, or for Minneapolis cops. And again, it's not to say that we shouldn't do more to fix police brutality or fix police interactions, but this idea that Derek Chauvin was some white supremacist who wanted to murder freaking George Floyd in front of the world, it's just not substantiated by the facts. And I know that pisses a lot of people off, but I don't know. To me, that's just what the evidence shows.
Yeah. I want to circle back to something you said, Ozzy, and something that Jerry was talking about earlier too. So you're talking about all these different people that are posting these tweets immediately assuming that the Boulder shooter was a white guy. And, obviously since he was taken into custody alive, he's a white guy. And then just all these basically, I'll call it as it is, really racist tweets against white people. Obviously, when we found out more information, we found out it wasn't a white guy, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, the point I'm trying to get to is none of these guys that posted any of these different tweets, they're not going to be victims of cancel culture, which I think is the most fucked up thing. Like, if one guy, just, one guy with a blue check mark next to his name said something of like, oh, another shooting happened, I bet it was a black guy. Oh my God, he would be just freaking hung out and dried. Like, there's no way that he would not be a victim to cancel culture. Yet hundreds of people, maybe thousands, I don't know, tweeted basically these really terrible things saying like, guarantee it's a white guy that did this, guarantee it's a white person. There's literally no repercussions for him. And this is just the world that we live in as far as the left versus the right. It's clear that the left is wanting to silence the right, and that they're the perpetrators of this cancel culture, and they're the ones that are pushing this narrative, and they're the ones that are brainwashing this next generation that's coming up to believe that they're the ones of safety, of justice, of social justice, of all these different things, and that people that lean conservative are the big bad boogeyman. And it's just, the narrative seems to be getting stronger every day, and there's no end game, and there's no way to stop it, it seems like. So
I would just respond with, like, again, not to make this, or not to paint me to being some super conservative, because I do think that, I'll just say it right now though, I'll say it straight up. If Ron DeSantis were to run for president, I would vote for him a million times over Joe Biden. But I do think that there is a very serious problem, especially within the Republican Party, with their adoration for Trump, and how it became kind of like a cult, and how we saw the consequences of that in January 6th. And we saw, how this cult of personality, how it led to, really bad consequences. And I think that I don't know, I saw some statistic the other day where it said, like, over at the very least over 70% of Republicans think that the election was stolen, this last election. And to me, that's just something that's, not at all substantiated by the facts. And I don't know. I think that needs to be called out. I think
I think
that
it
I don't
does need to
disagree.
be called
yeah,
out. Yeah,
Yeah,
I
I don't
wouldn't
disagree at
disagree.
all.
yeah,
But I think the difference between conservatives and liberals is that liberals will enact policies that's going to affect all of our lives. And I think conservatives, like, what is the craziest policy that conservatives have implemented? Like,
well, look
I
at
can't think of
Alabama.
one.
What do you mean? Look at what the abortion laws that they're trying to pass. They're trying to
Yeah,
make it
but
not even.
those are
That's
different. Like,
bad.
yeah, no, that's bad. Yeah, granted, it's bad. But I mean, are we, if you're going to compare oranges to apple or whatever the analogy might be, like, I feel like in the last year, the lockdowns have had such a detrimental effect, and they can be directly traced to like progressive liberal policies.
Yeah,
Um, while, yes, granted, the cult of personality around Trump and the abortion laws are, I think, important. I think it should be a matter of personal choice, but I don't know. I feel like most progressive policies rob people of freedoms and personal choices, and that's why I feel like I've been focused on those more versus what is obviously a cult of personality that fomented around Trump. But I feel like the consequences of a cult of personality in a conservative sense are not as detrimental than what we've seen in the last year. Because I mean, look at what's all that's manifested out of the George Floyd thing, like you said, and I agree that the George Floyd was not murdered by Derek Chauvin. Like, that's an uncontroversial statement, and it should be an uncontroversial statement. He died of a fentanyl overdose because fentanyl is a it's like a horse tranquilizer. But anyway, um, yeah, that shouldn't be a controversial statement. But look at everything that's manifested around that. Now you have critical race theory being taught in schools. Now you have
Yeah.
very hard pushes towards reparations. Now you have essentially cities being rioted and looted if Derek Chauvin's not convicted, and because of the murder or his death. But just, I don't know, like, I feel like there's a difference between extreme conservatism and extreme progressivism, and I feel like if I had to pick, I would rather pick extreme conservatism because that's the side that's mostly on the side of personal freedoms, and progressivism is very leaning towards big government and government taking control of people's lives.
Yeah. And I don't agree with anything you said, Ozzy, really either. And I agree with Jerry 100% on what he said. And I mean, I think it's fair that if people are listening to this for the first time, which would be surprising, but we are not a conservative based podcast. We call it as we see it. And unfortunately, right now, I just think that the left is the louder voice of things to point out as to what seems to be going wrong in this country. And like, I didn't vote for Trump in 2020. Um, I definitely identify as conservative. I would say I'm definitely more center right as far as like I'm much more libertarian, but I still would be more comfortable with conservative policies than I would with any liberal policies. And yeah, I just think you're right. I mean, what happened on January 6th, especially with the way the Republican Party views Trump, they lost any moral high ground that they had. And that's just really ruined them. And that's going to set them back for years. I mean, if Trump ever tries to come back into the picture as far as it be run for, a state senator or a representative in Congress or even president in 2024, it's going to be, that black eye is going to be brought up again of January 6th, and there's no getting around that.
Yeah. To me, that's the biggest cancer. And like I said, if it weren't for Trump, I would vote Republican, even though I completely disagree with their stance on abortion. And I'm mostly a secular person. I'm not really religious, but yeah, so many of the progressive politics, they're trying to cram down their utopian view of the world down everybody's throats. And I think especially right now with Biden in control, and basically every institution is dominated by liberals right now. The mainstream media, our politicians, the presidency,
Hollywood.
yeah, Hollywood, so many institutions are, and there needs to be a serious pushback. But throughout these last 4 years with Trump, and even now, I think that, you know, anytime you try to speak out about this, you're immediately branded a Trump supporter. You're
Mhm.
immediately branded, some crazy right winger, and it's not completely unwarranted. I don't think it's rational or reasonable, but it's not completely unwarranted, especially for the person that doesn't really pay attention to politics, because all they see is Trump, or all they did see was Trump, and the complete ass he made out of himself almost every day, the complete crazy things he would say daily. I mean, he was just probably one of the most immoral people that I could think of. And the fact that so many people supported him, and I understood, some of his policies were without a doubt really good, especially his foreign policy. I think he was superb. But you just couldn't divorce that from who he was as a person and the harm that that caused, because it gave license to so many people to just be complete assholes. And it also gave harm to for people to be, I guess, in a way more bigoted. That's a word that I don't really like to use, because you can be bigots, everybody can be bigots about almost anybody. Progressives can be bigots about conservatives and vice versa. But especially the way Trump talked about, Mexicans and just groups in general. He tried to ban every Muslim from the country. Like, I will tell you completely what my problem is with Islamic theocracy. I'm the most strident person when it comes to Islamism, but never in a million years would I think it'd be reasonable to ban or judge every 1.8 billion Muslims in the world. And yeah, I just think we need to call out the problem that Trump was, and he still remains, and just almost everything about him is just such a repulsive thing. Is why I didn't vote for Biden or Trump. But if you put a gun to my head, I think I would have still voted for Biden, even now with all the crazy thing that's happening. And I don't think Biden is perfect by any means, and I fully see all the criticisms about him. But I feel like I don't know, with Biden, I don't have to think about him every day. With Trump, it was just a daily, constant reminder of the in your face drama, and it's just became so overwhelming. Trump, I think, was just a orange, to put it bluntly, an orange shit stain on America. It made us look bad because he was such a bad person. He was a constant liar. He would manipulate people. Like, he did so many messed up things that people would just lose track of it. He accused Joe Scarborough of murdering his wife, like just completely psychopathic, delusional things that any other person would do. He would be ostracized justifiably from society. And yeah, I think it's just, I wish there was a reasonable counterpart. And you are seeing it now with Ron DeSantis, hopefully, with even Greg Abbott. He seems like a normal guy. And you are seeing, reasonable Republicans arise. But yeah, I just think the cancer that Trump was is something that definitely needed to stamped out, or be
Yeah,
stamped out.
and I agree. I think Biden is, by the same token, like a return towards reasonableism, towards actual, politics shouldn't be front and center all of the time. And Trump, unfortunately, was that. He was front and center all the time. And it was just every day, Trump said this, Trump did that. Um, but yeah, it's just, I feel like maybe, maybe conservatives or whatever, hardcore conservatives, right wing, whatever it might be, whatever term we don't use, but maybe they don't have a social media the way that progressives do, because Twitter is infested with this progressive activism, and maybe it's not as salient for us because we don't see it on the right, because I don't really use social media. Like, I don't see this sort of right wing ideology the same way that I see this left wing ideology on social media. So maybe, I'm sure it's there, but
Yeah.
Do you
I think
think
it
that a
also,
lot? Oh, go ahead. Oh, I was just gonna say, do you think a lot of the reason why you don't see as much of that right wing so-called media like you do with the left wing is because, at least this is me personally, like I don't really post a lot of my opinions online as far as like Facebook or Instagram, anything like that, because I know that the second I do, I might get a couple people that are like, yeah, I agree, but I will just get shredded, like nonstop bombardment from people on the left to try and silence my opinion because they don't agree
There's
with it.
and look, I feel like there's a misconception about what conservatism is and what there's no reason why believing that George Floyd was not murdered, that George Floyd died of a fentanyl overdose, is a conservative position. Conservatism just means that you are fiscally responsible, like you're not open to rapid change or rapid changes in our society. Like how did it become the fact that there is not a white or an endemic white supremacy system in the US? How did that become a conservative position? That doesn't make any sense. Like
I agree.
I feel
And
like oh, so
go
I was
ahead.
just gonna say I feel like people have lost sight of what politics are. Like it's just liberalism and conservatism are separate from these issues of race and bringing those up. Like I feel like there's this culture around like you can't disagree with what the norm is, especially concerning like Black Lives Matter, especially concerning things like feminism, trans issues, gay issues. Like if you have a dissenting opinion against the norm or whatever the wave might be at the time, like you're just branded conservative, or that might be a conservative. There's nothing political about those issues or
Mhm.
fiscal about those issues, and it's just we need
yeah,
a
that's
better
the thing
term.
that I think is the most like pernicious thing about all this is that, and it's why I have leaned more conservative as I've grown older, is that like I feel like if a conservative, your average conservative, if a liberal disagrees with them, they're gonna think, okay, at worst they're gonna think, oh, it's a liberal, hippie, like whatever, But I think now so many of the progressive and mainstream liberal class, they view the conservative as like inherently evil. Like you're a
Mhm.
bad person and you're a racist and you're the worst of the worst. If you simply disagree with me, if you simply disagree with me on policy, if you simply disagree with me, and that's to me is where I I back up and I say like, wait a second, like that can't be the conversation we're having. And again, it's like an otherizing. It's a you're turning people in this myopic, manichean way of evil and good in the world, and that's that. You're evil because you're conservative and I'm a good person because I'm liberal. And that's something that I think needs full steam ahead pushback, because that's clearly the path towards totalitarianism. That's path towards mass murder, because those people are evil and I'm a good person, and we need to do everything we can to stop them. And yeah, that's something that I think that's something that definitely made me hesitate as I grew older, because I voted for Obama twice. I was pretty much your I voted for Clinton too. And um and yeah, but once you start seeing that so many liberals view the other side as inherently evil, then like that's when I started to back away and started saying like, wait a second, like no, like I don't, even if I disagree with your crazy conservative, QAnon person, I don't think he's inherently an evil human being who deserves to be locked away forever, and that's, I
Right.
think that's a dichotomy that needs to be, that's important to emphasize. Yeah, I don't know.
No, I
But
I don't disagree at all.
and the problem here is like that we don't hear differences of opinions. Like Twitter, Facebook, all these places, all these social media platforms where we're all sharing our opinions, they're so quick to shut down anybody who might be deemed like quote unquote dangerous. Like they'll remove Milo Yiannopoulos, they'll remove Alex Jones, they'll take off Donald Trump. Like they'll remove all of these people, these quote unquote conservative voices, And this is why so many conservatives are just off of social media. Like there's no place to actually hear what they have to say. Um, and that's why it just seems like there's a progressive overload on these social media platforms because you are not welcome here. Like, and it's just people are not hearing dissenting opinions. They're just in their bubble. And I was listening to a podcast recently where on campuses, conservative students there, and there's a lot of them, they don't feel like they can speak out. They don't feel like they can voice their opinions. And that's scary. Like college is supposed to be a place where you can voice your opinion. And even in a lot of big corporations, like people are afraid to speak out when your corporation like Coca-Cola is shoving down your throat your evil whiteness. Like who's going to speak out? Like if you're a VP or if you're a manager at one of these companies and you have your career there, is it really worth speaking out over a fucking 15-minute video where you're just like, okay, I'll sit through this? Like, no, it's not. It's not worth losing your livelihood and your family's protection. Like, and it's just hard. You can't speak out because you'll be canceled.
Yeah. The examples are endless. The example is, it's not just the fact that, people are going to think you're an evil Nazi racist if you speak out and you just state your opinion, but your job is literally threatened. Like the whole livelihoods are literally threatened. It just happened like a week or two ago where a Georgetown law professor basically didn't even say anything conservative. I think she was a liberal. She basically said how, she was sad that a lot of her class, there was a lot of African Americans who were at the bottom of her class. And it was just, she was making a point about affirmative action. And it was just a mundane point about, she was stating a reality that sadly that, most of the African Americans in her class were at the bottom end. And she ended up getting fired for it. And that's just one of like hundreds of examples. But yeah, I mean, I just think it's important to emphasize that because so many people that, we would consider allies, especially me and Jerry, because we know a lot of liberals out here. I don't know how liberal Colorado is, but
extremely.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, also in California, it's just a majority of our friends are super liberal. A majority of the people we know are super left wing. But I don't know if it's the fact that they just don't pay attention to as much politics as we do, but they're just oblivious to the reality of so many situations where, the world isn't as rose colored as they think it is. And, there's real pernicious, real bad people, especially on the progressive side, who view the world again in this Manichaean worldview of good and evil. And yeah, it's definitely something that needs to be fought. And yeah, I don't know.
And I mean, yeah, that just, I don't know, maybe to wrap it up, but look, I don't understand what the end game here is. Like, look, people, I feel like there's actual problems, and then there's the things that people want to discuss. So like Joe Biden or people will criticize him for not bringing up, like the whole last couple of weeks, what have you been hearing? Stop Asian hate. Stop Asian hate. Okay, well, where is Asian hate coming from? Well, predominantly it's coming from the Black community towards Asians. And this is not something that people want to talk about. This is just a simple statistic that is just there for everybody to see. And I will be pilloried or ganged up on for just even bringing this up, but that's just there. And then instead of addressing an actual issue, an actual concern, what is the message that you're hearing? Well, the message was this crazy white guy went into massage parlors and killed a bunch of Asians. That's not true. He went in there because he was religiously oppressed, because he felt weird about getting hand jobs and he couldn't. I forget his entire story. He was like a super sexually frustrated guy who was very devout and religious, and his church basically chastised him every time he had like a sexual thought. But is that really what is driving Asian hate? No. Is it really the fact that Trump for the last 4 years or year was saying the China flu? Probably not. But that's just the narrative that people want to push. And you could be solving for actual problems. You could be looking at the root cause of issues. Same thing with George Floyd and violence. Like, is our biggest problem here really mass shootings? Well, no, that's not where most people are dying. Where most people are dying from gun homicides are in inner cities, and in the Black communities. And people in the Black communities will tell you this. They'll be the first ones to tell you this, that this is where actual problems are. But in the media, they don't want to talk about this. They'd rather just say, take away their AR-15s or whatever it might be. And that's I feel like ultimately that's where my problems are. It's like, you can just sound like you're virtue signaling, or you can actually address an actual problem, but then you're labeled as a racist.
Yeah. Well, and speaking of gun control, with this shooting that's recently happened, they're trying to do some pretty extreme gun control measures now as well. Speaking of that, so it's just the narrative has now changed since it wasn't a white guy shooting it, but it was a narrative that was going to be pushed regardless. As far as, once again, banning ARs, trying to restrict guns even more so than they are already, and just trying to push more gun laws on the books. And I've made it no secret on this podcast, like, I own guns. I love guns. I am a huge Second Amendment advocate. I could talk guns all day, but it's until I feel like, there's the Democrats or the liberals get what they want as far as this gun amendment, it's just gonna be pushed down our throats like we want to believe, and they just ignore the facts. Most mass shootings happen with handguns. Most homicides happen with handguns. In fact, there's more homicides that tend to happen with knives or with people using their hands or feet or even with freaking vehicles than there are with guns each year. And once again, they all tend to happen within Black communities, which is terrible. I'm not trying to say that, anything against Black communities. I think it's terrible.
What are you
I'm not trying to be racist here. I'm not trying to say that only Black people kill people. But it's just the facts, like the actual facts are ignored, and they just push down your throat. Like, until we get rid of AR-15s, there's going to be a mass shooting every week by some white guy. It's like, fuck you. No, there's not. Like, yeah, I don't know. Yeah. I just keep seeing, like, it's going to get to the point real soon where they're going to be pushing some form of gun control. It's going to piss off enough people, and it's going to lead to some form of violence. Yeah. And it's not going to be pretty. So.
Yeah, I guess, I mostly agree with what you said, Jameson, but I guess it could be a interesting point of, I guess, differences in a starting point, because, I believe in the Second Amendment as well, and I think you should have the right to defend yourself. And especially in America, the idea that we're ever going to get rid of 300 million guns that are already on the ground is just completely,
it's absurd.
Yeah, it's so freaking crazy. And so much of our public discourse is just completely squandered on pointless debates that are never going to happen. But I do think at the very least, there is something to be said, at least for me, for not banning guns, obviously, because that would never happen. And I think that would be immoral. And I think you should have the right to defend yourself. But I think there should be an argument, at least for me, there's an argument that when you're talking about acquiring mass killing machines like an AR-15, I don't necessarily think that banning would be a good idea, because I think either way, if you want one, you're going to get your hands on it. But I do think that there's an argument to be said that at the very least, we should be making it a little bit harder, especially for people that we can clearly tell are mentally ill, or we can clearly tell are, have problems mentally. And I just think that a good compromise, I guess, in an ideal world would be, again, leaving the Second Amendment alone, but at the very least creating just like we have, you register your car, you would register your guns, or, we have driver tests for people being able to get your license, your driver's license. And I don't know, at least for me, it makes sense to have some sort of a gun license. Like, you go and you take a test, you get checked out by a psychiatrist. We make sure you're not a psychopath. We make sure you're mentally stable, and you take, you practice with the guns and yada yada, and it'd be a process. And I get the argument also that, maybe that would in turn be a slippery slope, and that could, make it way harder for the average person to get a self-defense weapon. But I don't know. I just think that there is something to be said for that, something to be said that it is, at least for me, it's too easy for any crazy person to just go to Walmart and buy a freaking AR-15 and just kill as many people as he wants. And I get the argument that most mass shootings are not from AR-15s, or they're, they're handguns. And either way, if you get a handgun, you're still going to kill a lot of people. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know what you guys think of that.
Well, actually, I've said that on this podcast before, almost verbatim.
Yeah.
I've said I believe that it should be mandatory to. I'm a firm believer that owning a gun is a privilege, and that with privilege comes a lot of responsibility. And I have no quarrel if they decided to make me see, once every 3 years or something like that, I had to meet with a psychiatrist to make sure that I'm still mentally stable to own a gun. Like if I get hit in the head tomorrow and I become a little bit loony, I have no quarrel with somebody being able to take away my gun because I am now mentally unstable. Or if they put a longer waiting period on there, and if they want to cover this basically by saying hey, we're going to put additional tax on guns so that now before you buy one, you go see the psychiatrist, or whatever. Or if guns are already expensive, if you're willing to fork out $1,000 for a gun, we fork out another $200 to sit down with the psychiatrist first. I've said that before. I have no quarrel with that at all.
Right.
And I don't disagree that a person owning a gun, if they wanted to even, so actually something that I'm going to be doing here soon is I'm going to be taking a pistol instructor course. I'm going to be helping a friend of mine who runs a range become a instructor, or I'm going to be an instructor for his range. And I'm going to be teaching people basically the basics of using pistols from the very beginning, as far as how to load them, how to clean them, how to do, down to shooting, down to basically, the trigger mechanisms, the whole 9 yards, basically everything that's with it. So, and I wouldn't be opposed if somebody had to take a basic pistols course before they're able to buy a pistol as well. I have no quarrel with any of those things. And if anybody wants to make that argument, that's fine. But my other argument is Mexico's right across the border, man. It's easy to get drugs into this country from Mexico. It would be just as easy to get guns into this country from Mexico. If somebody really, really wanted a gun, if they really want a fully automatic gun, it's going to be real easy to get it for them. You just have to be willing to break the law, which most criminals are willing to break the law.
Yeah, I fully get that. I just like I said, I think that we should, at the very least, it's not gonna. This is another thing that I feel like, so many on the liberal class, they try to make this as oh, well, if a conservative doesn't do what I say, then that means they got blood on their hands and they're responsible for children dying. And it's just, again, it gets back to what we were talking about in the last podcast, and why so much of as I've grown older, so much of progressive politics is just, to me, it's just apparent that they want to live in this ideal world where, if you just do what I do, then it's going to make everything better. And it's just this idea, again, that you're ever going to get rid of 300 million weapons on the ground already in the United States, or the fact that, again, it's just so easy for any person to get a handgun, and any person can just go out and murder who they want. And it's sad. It's the sad world we live in. But I don't know, at least for me, you just have to make it more, I don't know, at least for me, it's making me way more I already own a gun, but I'm definitely going to start buying more just because, I don't know.
And anybody that says that this is an easy answer, or anybody that gives you an easy answer is a charlatan. Anybody that says right as soon as we get rid of systemic racism, then we'll solve all these problems. If we get rid of all AR-15s, then we'll solve all these problems. This is not an easy answer. This is not an easy problem to deal with. And I don't even know if there is an answer. I don't even know if getting rid of AR-15s or handguns would solve all of our mass violence problems. And so I just feel like it's very easy to see out all of the, not like all the charlatans and all the sort of fakeness that goes around with these answers. Like, this anybody who says on the media that if we just did this, then we could solve all these problems. Like, they're obviously lying to you.
Yeah, there's no easy solutions to any of this. It's going to keep happening, and it's sad, and it doesn't mean we shouldn't do anything. That's at least my point. At the very least, we should try to make it harder. We should be a process, just like there's a process to owning a car, should be a process to owning a gun. And yeah, it's not going to mean the end of mass shootings forever, but I don't know. It doesn't mean we shouldn't try to do it, at least for me.
Yeah.
No, and I don't disagree. Like, obviously, I would love it if I didn't hear there was a mass shooting in the news. It seems like almost every other month or so, and anything we can do to obviously save people's lives is great. But violence is a tale as old as time. Like I said in the last podcast, I mean, Cain killed Abel. So murder it goes back to the dawn of time, and violence is unfortunately just very, very common in human nature. And it's really going to be one of those ways, like, if we can ever get rid of that gene or that, emotion in humans to be able to get rid of anger and violence, that's the only way to really solve the problem. I mean, they banned guns in England. Great. People started hitting each other with cars. People started doing stabbings. People were still going over to, people's houses and hitting them with golf clubs, baseball bats. It doesn't stop violence. You just took away one tool, but there's still another one out there. So personally, and what's so sad about this recent shooting in Boulder, and this is a story I heard today, and I don't know exactly how true it is, and if it is true, it's absolutely heart-wrenching. It was a employee, so the shooter, he had a wound to his leg. It didn't come from the cops. It turns out that from the story I heard, it came from an employee of King Soopers. Like, he charged this guy with like a box cutter, and he was able to wound his leg before he ended up getting shot and killed. And this is where, I would make the argument, it's like, that's obviously terrible. But if this guy walked into a King Soopers and somebody was there with a concealed carry, there was 10 people there with a concealed carry that all of a sudden just unloaded on this guy, it would have been a completely different story. And that's where, people will be like, well, now you're just talking about having the wild, wild west. No, I don't think so. I'm thinking we're talking about possibly saving a bunch of people's lives. That's kind of what I think could have happened. But
yeah,
regardless, it's terrible.
That has to be the only real reasonable solution, other than what I was talking about earlier. But I just think it's going to be important, especially in America, to have way more concealed carry weapons out there, and people, responsible citizens, just ready, because these things are going to keep happening. And yeah, I just think the proposals that a lot of the progressives are coming up with, they're never, not only are they never going to happen. Mm-hmm. You're telling me that your little progressive policy, what first of all, you want to defund the police. So what, you're going to send social workers into people's houses to take away their AR-15s? Like, you are smoking crack, dude. That's never going to happen. And
right.
And yeah, I just think the reasonable solutions are that, again, they're not solutions, because there's no solutions in life. They're just what we have. And what we have is just make it harder for crazy people to get their hands on these weapons, and for a lot more reasonable, insane people to get their concealed carry weapons. And yeah, that's the best we can hope for, I guess.
Jerry, any thoughts?
I mean, if these policies go through, I feel like you're going to have a lot of states heavily consider seceding from the nation. If you're trying to implement policies about cops or anybody going into people's homes with no warrants, no nothing, just taking their guns, I don't know any cops who can execute that order. Yeah.
Well, Forbes did an article on it about how Biden is trying to get that pushed through.
You think Biden would be? I think Biden I think he has to know that that's something crazy. I think he's gonna try to pass something like a ban on assault rifles, or I don't know, something like that. But I don't think he's gonna
But I mean,
actually
if
prescribe to
that's,
go raiding people's houses.
I don't think so. But if that's the talk, or if that's, I don't know. I feel like people have a line that they're not willing to
Yeah.
cross, and yeah, I feel like this is it. Like people are going to die on this hill on the Second Amendment and big government, and we saw it a lot in the '90s. We saw it in Waco. We saw it in Idaho. The Oklahoma City bombing was Timothy McVeigh was essentially a very hardcore libertarian, but yeah, it was against big government. And what you're going to see is states heavily consider leaving the nation if this becomes law. But
Yeah, I mean, there's parts of even Colorado, and then I sent you that article as well. Parts of like, what was it? Parts of California wanting to join Idaho, or Oregon that were wanting to join Idaho, and there's a part of Colorado, Weld County, that wants to join Wyoming right now because they're so sick of all the extremely far left policies that Colorado keeps implementing. So, I mean, yeah, I could see that honestly happening. I mean, just all of a sudden the United States turns into Hunger Games and it's got a bunch of different districts. So I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, at the rate that we're going, I think it's inevitable. Like, I don't see the Republicans and the Democrats reconciling anytime soon, and it's sad, but I think it's just bound to happen. Really, it's just a matter of time. It's
unfortunately,
it's a grim picture because I think it's just going to mean the total domination of China for the next century. But I don't know. I think that's just the road we're headed down.
Yeah.
So
Well,
yeah.
So
good
hey,
victory
that's
lap.
good. Yeah, that's a real positive note to end things on, huh, guys?
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you weren't worried before.
What positive things have been in the news?
I don't know.
Nothing. It's
Yeah,
all
nothing.
just depression.
Yeah.
Life is suffering.
Meh.
Existence is pain.
Yeah, existence is pain.
Hi, Mr.
Oh,
Neesix.
God.
Look at me. Existence is pain.
Man.
Oh man. Well, yeah, Ozzy, I think we're also trying to plug your amazing podcast. It's
Right.
if you want to
Yeah.
tell us where we can find you, or
Yeah.
People can tune
I
in.
actually just started a podcast. It's called tentatively called Wizard of Oz. And you can find it on Spotify. I just applied for the Apple podcast and the Google Play, but for the meantime, it's on Spotify and Castbox. So yeah, check me out. I have my guest appearance, Jerry, for the first episode. So yeah, we'll see how it goes. I'm excited.
You have like
about
a
it.
Twitter and Instagram, anything like that so far?
No, just well, my Twitter is Ozzy Gonzalez. But yeah, I need to just probably just I'll make a Twitter tonight. But yeah, Wizard of Oz with 2 Z's at the end, and that'll be that.
Well, when you get like an email or anything like that set up as well, just let us know and we can have you come on and plug it again. So
Awesome. Yeah, I'll definitely do that.
cool. Well, any
Yeah.
final thoughts?
No, just existence is suffering, life is pain.
Jerry?
Enjoy while you can.
yeah, no, nothing. We'll try to be more positive on the next one.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
maybe
think I'm
maybe next one we won't do another politics heavy one. Maybe we'll try to find another hobby to talk about or something. So
yeah. Optimistic nihilism. That's my philosophy. We're all gonna die, but hey, at least we get to live in the meantime.
true.
That makes us the lucky ones.
Hey, old age is a gift that not a lot of people get. So just keep
Exactly.
that in mind.
Yep.
So last plug for us, you can find us on Twitter at owl_podcast. We're on Instagram. I think it's the Owl Podcast, but I think it's the_owl_podcast. Email is theowlpodcast@gmail.com. We'll probably create a Facebook someday. Excuse me.
Oh, and a YouTube.
We're going to make a YouTube. Actually, we already have a YouTube channel. We just haven't added anything to it in about 3 years. So
Nice.
we'll add it to this. And then, on Redbubble, you can buy some of our merch. If you go to any of our like social media platforms, though, there's a link to it on there as well. And yeah, so cool.
Awesome.
All right.
Great chat,
Cool.
guys.
Thanks.
All right,
everyone.
guys. Well, thanks for being offended with us.
Peace out.